So Jana is now with us, and she is by profession a nutritionist. She has had patients, and then she took a corporate hiatus and worked in a very large, one of the largest corporations. And then she came back to private practice, and she's physically in Charleston, South Carolina, and she's really one of the most prolific speakers in our state. And matter of fact, we were just talking about a speech that she's giving a week from now. So I'm going to turn it over to Jana, and she's going to talk to you about, give me one sentence. What is the highlight of today?
The title of my talk is Beyond Calcium, How to Support Your Bones Naturally, because what you were talking about, women empowering women, there's so much misinformation out there, and I want everybody to leave today feeling like you know a lot more about just how to stay strong and vibrant forever.
So how many of you have had that bone density test? I'm just kind of curious, of those of you that have had it, how many of you were told that your bones were not really strong? Yeah, me too. And I would venture that most women that have the bone density test, it comes back that you have some deficiency. And so this was a really interesting topic for me, because I'm super curious about how you can mitigate, as you age, bone health.
All right. Well, I'm going to start by telling my story. And my story is a long story. So I'm going to try to connect some of the education that I'll be talking about later and integrate that into my story. But since y'all don't have the slides, I gave you an image of how, in my mind, my bone health has been something that I have thought about my entire life. So this was when I was 3 years old. And I was with my parents visiting some friends of theirs, and I walked into their home and I slipped on a floor. I broke my leg, and it was really broken that it required that I be in a body cast for 6 weeks. And I'm 61 years old now, and that was when I was 3. And I can still remember the ride to the hospital. I can remember when they cut the cast off. I mean, I remember so much detail. So it's one of those traumatic events that has stayed with me my entire life. And it didn't stop from that incident. I had a broken arm at 5. I had a broken arm at 12. At Clemson, my freshman year, it's always an exciting year. Well, I ended up being in a car accident and I was a passenger, but I was almost paralyzed in that car accident. I crushed L1, which meant that I needed a spinal fusion from T9 to L3 with Harrington rods, and I've since had those rods out. And then I also cracked my sternum during that car accident, but I got everything back. That was a story in itself, because that was quite a journey. So had a lull for a while, and then at 44, I actually was on the phone with a healthcare provider, and I fell down the stairs, and I broke my leg. Had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at that time, and it's just, like I said, when I look back, and there's even more that I can share. But so the trauma that I went through growing up when it came to my bone health was significant, obviously. But then on top of that, for the last 30 years, I have known that I was at very, very high risk for osteoporosis. Because when I looked at my mother's family history, my mom had been diagnosed in her 50s, my aunts, I mean, you know, the typical stories that you hear with people breaking their hips and very sad endings and things like that. And so that was always, I was determined that was not going to happen to me. So I stayed on top of my bone health throughout, you know, my 40s and 50s. And then later on in my 50s,
I'm curious.
Yes.
Up to that point, did you ever take iron?
Well, and I did, and that is part of what makes me so passionate about giving the right information. But what happened when I got that call after a DEXA scan? This is how the call went. A med tech called me and said, "You have crossed over. You have osteoporosis." Because on my DEXA I was a negative 2.5. I just crossed over. We are going to make you an appointment for our bone specialist and at the bone clinic, and we'll set that all up for you. And I hung up. I said thank you, but I would probably not be attending the bone clinic right now. And the reason for that, back to my mother. My mom had been on every osteoporosis drug probably on the market and spent, I'm not exaggerating, probably over $100,000 on these osteoporosis drugs. She never improved, and I'm not against pharmaceutical intervention if we know the cause of like the bone loss. We got to figure out what's going on so that we can provide the proper medication. But in her situation, I saw side effects. She was losing jawbone. She was having all these things happen. So in my mind, I'm a functional dietitian, so I'm trying to get to the root cause of whatever issue I'm working with. So from a bone health standpoint, I was like, I'm going to figure this out. So I did tons of research beyond just, take your calcium and things like that. And this is what happened. I thought I had it all figured out. I had the calcium and the magnesium, and I had my vitamin D, and everything was really good. And then I had a couple things start happening. My blood pressure started spiking, like crazy spiking. And then I went to the dentist, and I have a biological dentist, very holistic, and the hygienist was like, "Are you not flossing? You've got a lot of tartar on your teeth." And I'm like, I'm flossing. So then they made me start having to come every 3 months. And I go back again. She was like, "You really got to amp up that flossing." I'm like, "I promise I'm flossing. I'm taking care of my teeth." And so before I was going to go back another time for another 3-month visit, I'm like, I'm feeling like I've got to dig into some of my pathways some more. So I do GI maps in my practice. So I looked at my microbiome as far as digestion and absorption and just kind of the landscape of my microbiome. And then I, as far as the sequence of events that I followed after that, I looked at my genetic pathways, and what I noticed was I definitely had some SNPs, and a SNP doesn't mean like, it's a polymorphism. So it means you might be predisposed if you don't support those pathways. So I definitely had a lot of SNPs when it came to vitamin D, and then I had major SNPs when it came to vitamin K2. Has anybody ever heard of K2? Okay, yeah. So K2 is different than K1. K2 actually activates a couple of proteins that make sure that calcium gets to our skeletal system. Okay? Because if it doesn't go to our skeletal system when we take calcium, where is it going to go? It's going to go to our arteries. It's going to go to our breasts. It's going to go to our kidneys. And that can contribute to issues with heart disease and women and everything like that. So I looked at the genetic pathways, and then I did a full micronutrient panel on myself. Everything looked pretty good, but my vitamin D was low and my vitamin K2 was low. I was like, okay, now I'm starting to connect the dots. I don't have the perfect formula. I don't have near enough K2. And the SNPs in my genetics had to do with recycling K2. So that increased my need that I needed to.
What is K2?
So it's a fat-soluble vitamin. Like I said, it's different than K1, which is more involved in blood clotting. but K2 activates two different proteins that this process is originated to deliver calcium to the skeletal system.
Can you eat certain things that amplify K2?
There's not a lot of food sources. I mean, we get some natto, actually the Japanese eat fermented food, but we don't eat some. Yeah, but it's still not as significant. Some source of vitamin K2, some animal foods and things like that. So we just don't get a lot in our diet. So I redid my formulation, my protocol for myself, and I had the calcium on board, but 2-to-1 ratio between my magnesium, and I really like algae-based calcium because it's highly absorbable. Had my vitamin D, and then I added much more K2.
So you're almost acting as a formulist at this point.
Yes, and it was myself. I mean, I was trying to obtain some objective data so that then I could make a good, educated decision on that. So this was the exciting thing, y'all. I start adding the K2, and I am not exaggerating, probably in a couple of weeks, my blood pressure plummeted. I mean, because before, it was bouncing around, but I could normalize it. But I was like, obviously there was something that was off. And then the exciting moment was when I went to the dentist. And I sat back and I was like, well, I asked her, the hygienist, how do my teeth look? And she goes, you don't have any tartar. And I went, all right, now it's making sense.
So do you think that gum health is an indicator of certain things going wrong in your...
I certainly see women in my practice, which I ask them, do you get a lot of tartar? But this whole calcium issue, I want to talk about more because it's so significant to make sure that we have the entire balance of things. I want to also, this is an important part, so because I had mentioned I had that DEXA scan, but that DEXA scan, my hospital did not offer the ability to look at the microarchitecture of my bone, and we can do that through, it's called like a TBS score. There's also another test, which is like an ultrasound, which is called a REMS. I'm just giving you the abbreviations for these, but that wasn't available in South Carolina, so I went up to North Carolina and I saw an orthopedist who just does bone health now. And he assured me, I actually was still osteopenic, I had osteopenia, but my bone quality was very, very good. And that's what we care about too, because you can have good bone mineral density and not good bone quality. So I got that just as more confirmation that I was on the right path for what I needed and felt really good about it. So what I want to go through with everyone though is I think when everybody's raising their hands, oftentimes people are asked to get a DEXA scan as they get older, postmenopausal. We know that as estrogen levels decrease, that it's going to impact our bone health. But there are so many other people that are at risk for having bone issues that is not getting talked about enough. And that's what I want to talk about. So obviously, if you have digestive issues, and celiac disease is a big one, and some people can have silent celiacs because when the villi are flattened, then you can't absorb minerals well, calcium and many other, iron and things being part of that. And your overall absorption is impaired as far as your bone quality. So celiacs, but also I think as far as women, anyone who has had an eating disorder, chronic dieting, that is going to impact your bone health. And there are a lot of women who have focused on how much they weighed and not looked at the composition of their diet, and that's had an impact on their bones. Another one that I see a lot too, that I think bariatric surgery. A lot of people go, oh, I'm going to have bariatric surgery, and this is going to solve my weight loss problem, but they're not told that they need to be on a lifelong protocol, taking calcium and vitamin D and all of these things. So then what happens, and these are the clients that I see, they come in and their bones have been impacted. One other that's a really big one, there's so many people taking PPIs for reflux, like gastric reflux, and those medications are only intended to be used for short periods of time. So when somebody is, we have to have really, really strong stomach acid to break apart minerals from our food and to digest protein. So if we don't have that on board, we're not going to be able to build bone. And people come in and they've been on these drugs for 20 years. I'm sure many of y'all have seen that. So definitely, you know, I just want people to think about it's not just getting older and being postmenopausal when it comes to, you know, our bone health.
Radiation chemotherapy.
Absolutely. Women who, especially in hormone therapy, as a result, if people have been on estrogen blockers, and for men too, for prostate cancer and things like that, that definitely.
So then a person has identified the fact that they have bone density challenges. What do they do?
So the first thing that I would do, as far as I would encourage, first off, to get some more information, like what I was talking about. When in my practice, one of the first things I do is look at the gut, because it doesn't really matter what you're eating, it's what you're digesting and absorbing. So you could eat this fabulous diet, but if you're not getting the nutrients in, you're still not going to be able to build bone.
So what happens if that's the case? Okay, so you said dieting, radiation, chemotherapy, postmenopausal. So you got a problem. How do you get it fixed?
So, and then I want to emphasize too that under normal conditions, we get a new skeleton about every 10 years. And a lot of people have asked this question of, they think we just have these bones and they're not constantly remodeling. So I'm going to share a little bit about that as far as that process. So we constantly, like I said, if we support these pathways the right way, then we have cells called osteoclasts, and those are cells that are breaking bone down. Just think of little cells scooping out that bone. And then we have other cells called osteoblasts, and those cells build bone. And what we want is a coupling action between those two types of bone cells, so that then we can build healthy bone. Unfortunately, many of the medications that are used for bone health, they stop the process. They might slow down the osteoclasts, and then you're still building bone, but you're building bone on an architecture that is not stable, because.
So you need to put the good stuff in.
Yes.
And take the bad stuff out.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why you raised your hand when they talked about cleansing.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm curious about that.
Well, that is definitely part of the environmental for anything, like when we are, as it was alluded to, Christina, it's not just like we're adding things in, but we've got to take out the things, otherwise we're not going to be able to have proper bone remodeling. But one other thing I wanted to mention, so if somebody wanted objective information, you can actually do blood tests and look at bone remodeling markers. So you mentioned that you had a DEXA scan that was not favorable. Well, my suggestion would be for somebody in that situation, well, let's look at your bone remodeling markers. Let's look at the rate in which you are building bone, and let's look at the rate in which you're breaking bone down. And that gives me a good idea, and I can repeat those tests about every 3 months to see a lot better picture of, again, root cause. Are we not building fast enough? Are we breaking down too fast? And all of
Is that
things.
genetic or is that environmental? Is that
Well, and all of those. And I'll give you a summary of all of that. So let's talk about the nutrition part. When we look at bone, about 50% of bone is protein by weight. And I think that's also, people think it's just calcium. I got to have plenty of calcium and I'll have strong bones. But we have this collagen matrix, and then we fill in that matrix with these minerals. Calcium is the predominant mineral, but we've got 16 other vitamins and minerals that have to be on board to have proper bone remodeling. So to answer your question on that nutrition part, protein is something that we really want to emphasize, but not just protein alone. Think more Mediterranean, okay? We want about 30 grams of protein at each meal, 3 times a day for postmenopausal women, okay? But we want the diet to be more alkaline, so that means we need to eat plenty of fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, all of those good whole foods to build the bone, okay? So on that nutrition part, and then as far as, I think most people are aware, if we're trying to focus on good healthy foods, we're going to be trying to avoid a lot of processed foods, because definitely those are going to be more acidic, and we want more of an alkaline setting.
My assumption is alcohol is not really.
In excess, yes. In excess, there's some studies that show a small amount of alcohol actually can support bones, but I think that's where we have to be respectful of the amount of alcohol. So having a glass of wine with dinner, people should be able to do that and not feel bad about having a glass of wine. But a couple of other things I think that we touched on, and I talked about things as far as looking at digestion and absorption, but as far as the protocol that most women need to be on, this is one of those takeaway things, because this upsets me in my practice. As fast as I can educate people, I open a magazine and I see misinformation. So the amount of calcium that we need, like I said, we need about a 2-to-1 ratio between calcium and magnesium and these other vitamins and minerals. But if we have too much calcium and we don't have K2 on board, along with that vitamin D to improve the absorption of calcium, then we are putting women at higher risk for heart disease. And I have people in my practice that have come in and their calcium score is high. And they were told to take 1,200 milligrams of calcium every day and vitamin D. Big missing components, right? Most postmenopausal women need about 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium between their supplements and their food. So not just calcium. And then we have to have, like I said, the vitamin D and the K2. So are any of you taking a vitamin D supplement? Do you have it paired with K2? Awesome, for many of you. Because we always want to pair vitamin D with that K2. So that is, a major part of it. There are formulations, and I use several of those that have the right ratio of calcium to magnesium. They have the vitamin D, they have the K2, they have the boron, they have a little vitamin C. I mean, they have like the whole formulation. And then we still need to work on diet. Just somebody taking,
So when you say formulations, does that mean that you can order a pill
Yes.
for that formulation?
Yeah.
And what's the name of that prop, or is that just based on every single person's individual need?
I mean, there's a couple of brand names that I use in my practice.
I'm curious.
Okay, so AlgaCal has some good clinical studies. So I use AlgaCal Plus in my practice, and then I also use a product called OsteoVegan, and OsteoVegan has AlgaCal in it,
And
And
it's algae cow,
it's an algae-based
That's
system.
what I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
And algae obviously is protein.
well, it's a mineral, and it's got even more minerals in it as far as the ease of absorption. Back to just because we take something doesn't mean that our body can readily use it. So I have had, I feel the scientific support behind AlgaCal as a company. I think they're doing an excellent job. I do use a lot of OsteoVegan that has AlgaCal in it, because I have a lot of people that don't, maybe they need a little extra B12 every day, and just a couple of other vitamins and minerals that I want to also, so we're not having to have a whole pill box on board with that. But also, our body can only absorb about 500 milligrams of calcium at a time. So we need to take that into account. So if you're taking a supplement that has, say, 700 milligrams of calcium, and you're getting the rest through diet, I mean, it's like something over time that women, like if they're having some Greek yogurt for breakfast and they know they're probably not going to have any calcium in their other two meals. Well, maybe take your calcium at the other meals so that you'll get, more optimal absorption. Yeah. But I want to make sure I answer your questions, and that was at the end. So when we look from a holistic standpoint from a bone remodeling standpoint, that nutrition, the protein, getting that collagen matrix, filling it in with the right minerals is key. But then we also have the activity, we have the environment, and we have the stress management. So I'm going to just touch on a couple of key points for there. Activity, we need, like when we walk, that certainly, a lot of the studies shows it doesn't build bone, like especially in our spine, but it slows down the rate at which bone is breaking down. So those types of activities are wonderful, but we also need resistance. So doing some machines or doing some weights, because when we're pulling on those muscles, building those muscles, that pulls on the bone and helps to build bone. So we have to have that activity component. When we look at what's happening as far as the rate at, when people are losing more bone than they should, a lot of times that person is inactive.
Activity.
Yes, activity is huge. So the nutrition, the activity, and then stress. Okay, I'm gonna look at my notes, y'all, because this one's important. Make sure I'm not gonna miss anything. There's certain healers that I've definitely learned throughout my career, and I can tell you one thing that has been on my mind so much is, we cannot heal our bodies if we are in fight or flight. Okay, we can't digest our food, right? We have to be in rest and digest. I cannot tell you how many people have come into my office with GI complaints, and they're expecting, we're going to do a GI map, but then, I'm going to put them on this real sophisticated protocol, and we start with, I want you to do some deep diaphragmatic breathing before you eat, and I want you to chew the heck out of your food. I want you to chew till it's uncomfortable. And just doing those couple of things, I get messages, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. I'm not bloated. I don't have, all of this going on.
Breathing and
chewing your food. You get so much more nutrition from, you were talking about the microbiome. Well, if you don't chew a piece of broccoli, think about it, you mechanically break that down. Digestion starts when we look at our food, and then when we mechanically break it down, we're going to get more food value from that. If you have not chewed that piece of broccoli, and we've got undigested fibers mechanically, the microbiome is going to have a happy dance, right? They're going to really be fermenting that food, because now it's their job to break it down if we did not break it down. So
tell me about the breathing, tell me exactly what you do.
Okay.
I want to do this because I got to figure this one out.
Okay, so diaphragmatic, we could do a whole segment on diaphragmatic breathing.
So diaphragmatic breathing is different than just shallow breathing. I mean, we're always breathing, but when we do deep diaphragmatic breathing, that's stimulating our vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is the longest nerve in our body. It's involved in digestion. It's involved in putting us into a relaxed state, a parasympathetic state, and not just being in fight or flight. And so that diaphragmatic breathing, I mean, we're breathing in, like we're going to inhale from our nose. Like, but you can put your hand on your belly. You want to make sure that you're belly breathing. When we breathe in, my belly should be expanding, usually till about the count of 5. There's different sequences that we can do with breathing, but
And then slowly breathe out.
How many times do you do that before you start eating?
depends on issues. Probably, I tell people at least 1 or 2 minutes, you know, if not longer. But that takes a pause, you know. Put the phone away, no distracted eating, just focus.
And then chew, chew, chew. What about sleep?
Sleep is on my list there. You're looking at my notes.
No,
No, yes, we've got to have that 7 to 8 hours of good quality
I'm
sleep.
curious, does anyone in this room actually get 7 to 8 hours of sleep?
I try.
Really?
I do it at 3 o'clock I wake up.
3 o'clock you wake up. So you can go to bed early, but you wake up. Do you go to the bathroom at, oh, you go to bed late, but you wake up no matter what?
But that's back to, yeah, and there's so much to that. I mean, that's getting our circadian rhythm to work properly, our cortisol awakening response. We should be up with the sun, and then we should be going down with the sun. So putting your phone away, you know, just protecting yourself from all the blue light that now we get exposed to constantly.
Do any of you actually sleep all night, or does sleep all night? All right, how many times you actually sleep all night? You never get up to go to the bathroom. Well, you're like young.
She's young.
What about you? You too? You sleep through the night. No one else sleeps through the night. I used to too. So it's an age thing. Anything to do with calcium on that one?
I get up to 10.
My answer.
But the point of all of this, you know, we're talking about the breathing for helping with digestion and absorption, but also if we are in that fight or flight, we're in a state of inflammation. And if you're in a state of inflammation, you can't build bone. So that's why it's so important. And then so many other things like spending time in nature, not just going to the gym, go to the park. You know, forest bathing is a thing in Japan, Pacific Northwest, getting talked about a little bit more on the East Coast, but spending time with nature. Socializing with your friends really helps us manage stress. So all of those
The
things.
sun. I have a friend, Christina, that when she gets in the sun, and I'm not a sun person, but I'd be curious, how many of you need the sun? That's so crazy to me. Kimmy is a sun person.
Yeah.
From Ohio to South Carolina for that reason.
For the sun.
Yeah.
And when you're not in the sun, what happens?
It's depression.
Is everyone else like that?
Yeah, your mind is clearer.
And it's activating your vitamin D, because that's the main source how we get vitamin D, is the sun. So, yeah.
That's what? It's crazy.
Grounding, yes. Grounding is connecting to the earth, to the magnetic field of the earth. So walking on the beach, taking your shoes off, unless the grass has been sprayed. Sorry, if the grass has been sprayed with Roundup, it gets complicated. It really does. But it was kind of exciting. I had coordinated a group of about 40 of us at Easter, a lot of parents and kids. Most of the guys were like 25 and girls. And after Easter dinner, we were at this park, and it was mentioned, hey, let's go for a walk. And I could not believe that some of the guys were like, y'all, we need to take off our shoes. We need to ground. And I'm like, good. I'm glad that, you know, this is kind of catching on. But on that, also, the final thing is prayer and meditation. And that's, like I said, a big topic. But just remember, self-talk as far as healing, and that goes for our bones. And I'll share something with you in just a minute on that. But lowering again and telling ourselves that we're healing, telling ourselves that we're good. I'm strong, I'm healthy, I'm healing. And I think that's really important back to that diagnosis of osteoporosis, because women's, just to hear, oh, you have osteoporosis, or you have osteopenia, they feel fragile, not strong and vital. And that's why I was really interested in doing this talk, because I don't want women to feel like they can turn things around, they can change things.
We're gonna start wrapping up. Jen's giving me that note.
Yeah.
Bring this to a complete circle. If someone is truly interested in bone health, what should they do?
So they need to implement all of the things. Like I said, they need to work on a whole foods, nutrient-dense diet, more like a Mediterranean, plenty of protein, about 30 grams of protein. Per meal, yes. They may need to have a bone supplement on board as well, because most people are not going to get enough. And then again, back to you, it's not just what you're digesting. I mean, eating, it's what you're digesting and absorbing. So there's chewing, breathing. The environmental part that was talked about so much is important. You know, filtering your water, pulling out the plastics, you know, washing your fruits and vegetables well with baking soda. And so, yeah, avoiding fluoride too. That's you know, trying to use a toothpaste that doesn't have fluoride, and that's back to filtering our water.
One question.
I got to tell one more thing.
All right, move along.
Sorry, because that's why I said my story is long, and I might even get a little emotional with this. You got it? Yeah. So, I thought my story was over, and I knew I had good bone quality, and I knew that I did everything properly. So it didn't have anything to do with my bone quality. But in January of last year, I had a sequence of, I had a freak accident. It was a traumatic fall. I was walking my dog, but she didn't have anything to do with it. And I fell in such a manner on this street, kind of going uphill, off a curb, lot to this story, and I slammed into the road. And I broke my wrist in two spots, okay? I required 2 plates, 15 screws, and a cadaver graft, okay? But this is where I want you to feel inspired. I healed so quickly. I went back in, and the orthopedic surgeon was like, "You're done. You don't need this." Now, unfortunately, I did have a reaction to all the metal. So 10 months later, I had the metal removed this past October. Again, I healed perfectly, but this is how I want to end, because I hope this will inspire. Because back to the bone remodeling, our bones always remodeling. I've had these tests, right, the DEXA scans and stuff like that. But when I woke up in recovery, and my orthopedic surgeon walked in, and I said, how did my bones look? Because he went in to take all the metal out, and he beamed, and he said, "Your bones look great." He said, "Your joints look great." He goes, "You're so small bone," but he goes, "Your bones look great." And that was just amazing, because you know, we don't know why things happen to us. God and I have had a lot of talks. I don't get it, because I had spent an hour in prayer before I went on that walk that day. So we don't understand, right? I'm sure many of you have had circumstances in your life where we don't understand. But maybe it was to just spark that much more passion, where I can reach more women with the right information, so that they can stay strong and vibrant forever and feel like they've got it. They've got it, this part of their health.
Janet, thank you. That was great.